So welcome to our discussion this afternoon, Sex and the City. My name's Gareth May, and I'll be chairing these lovely panellists. So we're just going to be looking at the role that sex plays in the life of the modern man. We're going to be looking into digitization and social networks and the way in which that's changed masculine representation of sexual expression and so on and so forth. And we're also going to try and answer the question, is the erection the ultimate sign of maleness? Which I can guarantee will not be as Trivial Pursuit this Christmas. So that's the one I'm going to be taking notes on. I'm now going to ask each of our panellists to say who they are and just talk a little bit about their area of expertise.
I'm Nina Burrows. I'm a psychologist. I'm actually a psychologist who specialises in the psychology of sexual abuse, and I guess on paper it might look like they've slipped me in as there's like a safety message. Don't forget to get consent when you're having sex in the city and the countryside, but suburbs. That's not why I'm here, although I'm happy to talk about consent. I actually get invited to talk to young people about consent, although I have to say I spend most of my time talking to police officers, prosecutors and judges about the psychology of sexual abuse. But when invited to talk about consent, I normally actually don't take up that opportunity because I don't think anybody wants to have a lecture about the need for consent, and I actually don't think that we need to have that conversation if instead we have the conversation that every young man and woman in the country wants to have, which is how do you get to be really, really good at sex? How do you get to enjoy a full and happy sex life? How do you get to be a really good sexual partner? And happily for me, that conversation means that we don't have to have this, make sure you get consent because it's illegal not to kind of conversation. We can have a conversation where people understand the reason why they want to have consent is because to have a healthy, full, happy sex life, consent is implicit in that. You want a fully active partner as kind of an entry level into enjoying good sex. So I think that my work, and I spend 99% of my time talking about the inverse of what we're going to be talking about today, the dark side of sex, sex when it's used as a weapon. And when you become an expert on something like that, you do by default become an expert on the flip side too. I guess if you become an expert at darkness, you are also an expert at light, because to understand one, you also understand the other. So I think conversations around the psychology of sex when it's good can be informed by our understanding of what the hell happens when sex is used as a weapon. Why would somebody do that to somebody else? What is the impact on that on the victim? Understanding these things can also help us understand why sex is important to us, to our psychological growth, to our growth with our partners. So I'm really keen that in society we stop having conversations about technique when it comes to sex, and we start having conversations about the psychology, vulnerability, courage, knowing what you want and having the courage to ask for it. These kinds of things that sound simple but are actually very difficult.
Great. Callum, do you want to?
Yeah. Hello, my name's Callum McSwiggan, and I'm one of those annoying creative types that makes videos on the internet. I have a YouTube channel called Eat Gay Love, where I talk about LGBT issues, mental health, and I also do a hell of a lot of sex education, which I guess is the main reason I'm here today. I also write for various publications about sex and relationships, and I also have a day job where I work for an HIV charity trying to get the message out there about HIV. And I think I think this event right now is really, really important because I feel like we're on the brink of kind of a sexual revolution right now. And I feel like there's a real momentum around things changing, things to do with LGBT sex and things to do with sort of non-cisgender normative sex. And things are really starting to change right now. And I think it's quite apt that this panel is called Sex in the City, because obviously back in the 90s we had Sex in the City, which really kind of brought female sex into the equation. And now we're kind of looking at kind of a broader spectrum of things. And yeah, I think things are really starting to change right now, so I think it's good that we're seizing that momentum and having these conversations, and yeah, so that's kind of me.
Great, thank you. Rebecca?
Hello, I'm Rebecca Lowry, also known as the Sexual Alchemist. For the last 10 years or so, I've been working with mostly men, helping them transform their sexuality in lots of different ways, mostly by, like you were saying, about it not being about technique, but about it being about presence and embodiment and doing work on ourselves so that when we come to our own sexuality or our connection with somebody else, we're fully present and we're making good choices and we're not maybe coming from our conditioning and our shame and our fear that most of us are conditioned with. And I brought some notes because there's a couple of things I really wanted to say, so I'm going to just glance at those if I can. When we were asked to be on the panel, we were given some questions. I think it's in the description about what this panel would be about. And I saw the questions there, and I thought, actually, I'd rather put forward some different questions. But I know I won't remember them if I try to, so I've got them here. So I just want to share these with you. It'll give you an idea, really, of where I'm coming from with men and men's sexuality and sexuality in general, and also the wider conversation that you're saying that is about all genders and all of that. So one of the questions that was put forward was, is promiscuity built in and inevitable? And I would like to ask a question, how can we support men, and anyone, but this is about men, to learn and grow and develop so that they can make conscious choices about what they do with their sexual energy, sorry, I'm pointing at you, and power and their desire. Another question that was asked was, can you reconcile a high sex drive with long-term monogamy? And I would like to ask, how can we enrich and deepen long-term monogamy, if that's your choice, by bringing our high sex drive into the relationship? And the last one was, I'm pointing again, are men better at separating love and sex? And to that, I'd like to ask, how do we open men, and again, anyone, but this is about men, to the magnificent and magnifying effect on sex that happens when you blend it with love and consciousness and open-heartedness? So that gives you maybe a better idea of where I'm coming from with men and sexuality.
Thank you very much. Geordie, do you want to go up?
Hello. My name's Geordie Sinclair. I am very much an alpha male, and about 3 years ago, this is a true story, I was in an amazing relationship and everything was great and we had lots of sex and we loved each other incredibly, so I thought, and literally came home after a night out with her, and she said to me, George, you know what? Yeah, it's over. Literally out of the blue. And I know. So, yeah. But anyway, so I was searching the internet for people that were going through the same thing, and guys in my situation that seemed to be really confident, seemed to go out a lot, seemed to do lots of stuff, seemed to be full of life. And, you know, there are lots of articles, but there wasn't anyone that I could really relate to that went through the same sort of thing and the same story and all the rest of it. So after a few months of literally listening to Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor on repeat, I realised that, you know what, I actually have to get off my ass and start doing something. And so I started the blog, 30-something London, shameless plug for those of you on the phone, that really sort of explored what it's like to get back into dating, what it's like to get back into being sexual with new partners, meeting new people, doing as much as you can to rediscover who you are after a long-term relationship, because I think that's one of the things, we forget who we are when we are with someone for such a long time. And over the course of the last 3 years, I've learned a lot about myself. I've been out with a lot of women, some great, some not so great. I've been in some great relationships, again, some great, some just absolutely terrible. But I also put on some more writers, so we have a gay angle on the site as well. We've got a girl as well who writes some really good stuff. And we just wanted to sort of bring as much as we could onto the site in terms of how sex is, you know, as Callum sort of pointed out before, it's not so taboo anymore. People are into lots of different things. Everybody's different, and people are really opening up and exploring. And in this day and age, I think it's really, really important that we do understand that. So that's me. I don't know.
No,
if there's anything else.
Thanks very much. That's great. Okie doke. So let's get the discussion underway. First question, Nina. This is a bit of a hard one, as it were. No pun intended. Maybe a little bit. Obviously, you're talking about there about knowledge of the darkness gives you knowledge of the light.
Yeah.
So, question is, what is the psychology of good sex?
You know what, the metaphor that I find useful when I'm trying to understand this stuff myself is actually improvisation. So what are you doing in terms of psychology if you are in a situation where you are willing to improvise? So for me, there's, if you can imagine going to improvisation class, I don't know if anyone here, you might want to put your hands up and say you're really good at improvisation. But when you're doing that, improvisation is very playful. And you have to turn up, and you have to turn up, all of you. You can't be passive, you have to be active. And you have to work with what the other people are bringing. And you don't know where you're going, but you're going to go there together. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And this is the kind of stuff that I kind of see as a useful metaphor for what is a really healthy, positive sexual encounter. What's the psychology around that? It feels incredibly vulnerable to improvisation. You don't know if you're worried about doing the wrong thing. In fact, we find scripts really reassuring. They're safe. We know what to do when it's all going to happen, and we know when we've got to the end. And it feels safe, but it's dull as anything. Improvisation is about purposefully wandering into the unknown and having the skills to therefore do that, the confidence to make yourself vulnerable, the self-awareness to know when you're feeling safe and all those kinds of things. But also the ability to connect with other people in a way that's really playful.
I was going to say the communication and the trust. That must be quite a big part.
Yeah, because when we're having sex, we tend to focus too much on the physicality. And sure, so you're physically exposed during sex, but you are also psychologically exposed during sex. And I think we need to recognize that. We're all worried. I mean, even just if we think about our worries that we have about our bodies, about performance, about our partner, it's actually a very psychologically vulnerable thing to do, to say to your partner, actually, I'm not enjoying that. And actually, this is what I really enjoy, and could you please do that? That is a vulnerable space for both people. Can you navigate that space together in a way that still feels playful and fun? This is the psychology of how you connect with someone else. If you can't do that, where do you go? You go to this rigid script, and it's the inability to have that awareness, to be yourself, to be able to play, and play means about listening to the other person, of course. If you can't do those things, then that's where the conversation goes to the other space of my work. I think conversations around consent really also need to be conversations around rejection. How do you hear rejection and respond to it? What does it mean to you to be rejected by somebody sexually? And how can you cope with that? Because sexual abuse is a way of taking rejection off the table.
It's interesting because a lot of that seems to me to be about being able to know what you want and ask, for what you want. Callum, do you find that with social media, and obviously you're on YouTube, has that allowed, men specifically to be more confident? And has it allowed them to sort of express their sexual identities? Is it made it easier or harder for them to express their sexual identities or find their sexual identities?
Well, I think I'd like to start off by saying that the internet as a whole is kind of responsible for, I think, a lot of negative thoughts about sex. As soon as the internet existed, so did pornography, and we had all these images out there of people having sex, and it was kind of sex where penis plus vagina, smash, 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 that's what sex is. And there was kind of no sort of emotional connection there. But I think in perhaps the past 5 years, maybe the past decade, social media started giving people a bit of a platform to talk about sex and talk about it in a more open way that isn't just physical bodies coming together, but also kind of talking about the emotions behind that. And I think particularly for young people, maybe, people between sort of 12, 18, that sort of age, where they're very vulnerable people, they're seeing a lot of things that are out there, they're seeing a lot of information about sex, whether we like it or not, they're seeing a lot of pornography. So they're seeing all these things kind of being forced down their throat, and they don't know which of these things to listen to, which of these things are true, which of them are false. And I think the good thing about things like YouTube now is that it's giving people a platform to get out there and start talking about sex and start talking about all these things and kind of giving younger people a real insight into it. And I say younger people, but not just younger people. I often make videos about sex, and I'll have people in their 30s, their 40s. They'll send me an email and they'll say, oh my God, I had no idea about this. And it might be something incredibly simple that you wouldn't think that somebody might not know, but we aren't being educated properly in schools about sex. We're not being, a lot of the time our parents aren't having these conversations with us. So I think social media and YouTube are really helping to break down that boundary. And I think if nothing else, it's kind of demanding that schools change, that parents change, that people do start talking to kids and teenagers about sex, because they need to know these things whether we like it or not.
Do you get people coming to you in the comments and asking you questions and sort of saying, I felt like this, and you've given me the opportunity to explore that part of my sexuality? I mean, do you get that do you experience that quite a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time I get, you might get, I said before, like 12 to 18-year-olds, but sometimes it's much, much younger than that. I get maybe a person will comment and they'll say, oh, I'm 10 years old, there's a boy in my school, it's a boy, and they're like, oh, it's a boy in my school, and I have these feelings towards him, and I don't understand what that means. And it's just opening up those conversations to everybody, no matter how old they are, no matter their gender, no matter their sexuality.
Rebecca, it seems to me that we paint men generally as these uber-confident sexual entities, that know how to, as Callum described, the smash bit. We know that off by heart. But is that an unfair portrayal?
No. Men as confident beings.
Yeah, I mean in a sexual sense, we seem to suggest that they are these, they know exactly what they're doing in the bedroom and they have to be that. Is that unfair to sort of force that idea on men?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think as many men as there are that exist in the world, that's as many different personalities and sexual personalities as you'll find. And I've probably worked with over 2,000 men in private sessions, and most of them, I would say, are looking to build their confidence in some way, even if they're really confident and dating a lot. And I'm not looking at you, and dating a lot. Even if they perceive themselves to be really good at sex, I find that they all know that there's more than smash, 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 even though we haven't been taught. Any sex education in school is about how not to make a baby. It's never about pleasure. It's never about connection. It's never about opening your heart. And so I think painting a picture of men are this in any realm is really dangerous, because then you get men thinking, well, if I'm not that, am I a man? And, that's so unfair. It's really... It breaks my heart when I see men that come and tell me. I had a chap who came and told me that his genitals were deformed and that he'd never been with a woman, and he was 35 and he really wanted to get married and have babies. And we talked for a while, and I said, look, you're just going to have to show me, because I need to know what we're working with here. And I had been researching all kinds of, things that I'd never heard of before, just in case. And eventually he showed me. And there was this perfectly normal penis there. And I said, can you tell me what to you, I feel quite teary saying this, what do you see here? And he said, it hangs to the left. And I said, yeah. I said, most hang one way or the other. He said, no, they don't. I've seen porn, and they're straight.
That you honestly...
I swear.
Yeah, you've been changed
I
that
feel
much
really
by it.
emotional telling you. And he, I see stuff like that a lot. And, I'm not a man because my penis hangs to the left. I'm not a man because I see that all the time, or my penis is this or that, or I don't like to have sex the way that porn shows me I should, or, the classic is I like things in my butt. Does that mean I'm this or that, Or I'm really dominant and like to hurt people, or I'm really submissive and I like to, anything you can imagine is a reason why someone thinks they're not enough or they're not man, and that's bullshit. Whatever it is that you desire, as long as it's consensual, is perfect. Yeah.
Geordie, another sort of myth is that men are promiscuous. We all just love to sow our seed, which I always find that quite a weird image, the seed image.
Actually, sowing seed.
Yeah, just like throwing out seed. It's like a farming image to me. I'm from Devon, so that's what it means to me.
But some people are into that.
Mate, some people are. The seed throwing. They love it, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But Geordie, do you find, being a single chap, obviously you write about your blog, but you date a lot, is there this idea that, he's just looking for the casual thing, he's just dating, it always seems synonymous with shagging around?
Yeah, the first thing that does, first came across when I started the blog was, he just wants to sleep around. And it was really tough to sort of get that across that, no, that's not my motive. I'm not one, because there are a lot of blogs out there, and obviously, there's books like The Game, which are just focused on picking up women and basically sleeping with them as a, end goal. And so the first thing that sort of pops to mind is, guys are only interested in one thing. But if you actually go out and speak to a lot of guys, a lot of them aren't, and a lot of people are looking for that connection. But I think, as Callum sort of said before, with social media sort of playing such a huge part, and the internet obviously as well, is that people sort of feel that the first thing that comes out is, oh, you know, they'll complain. You know, went on a date last night and he was only interested in one thing. And so all of a sudden it creates this big sort of storm. Oh, yeah, most guys are like that, and that's the sort of reputation we have these days. But again, you know, it's definitely not the case. Unfortunately, it's just that stereotype that.
But why do you think there is that stereotype? Because obviously on your blog you try and do something different. But
yeah.
do you feel like resistance for that? Is there people like, oh Jesus, we don't want to hear this. We want to have this narrative of the promiscuous man?
I do, and I sort of think I mean that's been there for a long time, and I think that the thing with with being promiscuous is that there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think people need to accept that some people are promiscuous, and you can't sort of complain that a guy is after one thing. If a guy is after one thing, you know, we just have to accept it. That's just him. As long as he's not, you know, hurting someone, or as long as he's not trying anything. But if he goes out with you and is completely honest and says, hey, you know what, this is all I'm after, then that's who he is. You know, that's what he's like. But there's a lot of great guys out there that aren't like that at all. But it is, yeah, I think it is just that reputation that's been built over time.
Can I just add to that as well? I agree. I agree completely with what Geordie's saying. I think there's definitely, as a society, we're constantly saying that all men are promiscuous. We're constantly putting this idea out there. So then, for young kids and teenagers growing up, they're actually starting to believe that. And I know the same thing goes for, we all seem to think that all gay men are sluts, because man plus man, all two extremely sexual beings, put them together and they're going to be very promiscuous. And I remember being a young teenager and thinking that myself, and thinking, oh, I've come out as gay, therefore I have to sleep around to fit in. And I remember going out onto the gay scene as an 18-year-old and suddenly finding myself pushed into sleeping around with lots and lots of different people. And it took me maybe 4 or 5 years to actually realise that actually, no, that's not what I wanted at all. It's just an idea that had been put into my head.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there does seem to be these sexual conventions as well when it comes to men. They're meant to be promiscuous, but also they're meant to be sort of like straight down the middle. You know, what I wanted to ask you, Nina, is there's this, seems to me that for a man to sort of say, I have these sexual fantasies, like you were saying, you know, to have things, you know, like to ass play or whatever you want to call it, anal play, whatever you want to call it, there's this sort of connotation of that being a gay lifestyle thing, which is absurd. And at the same time, a man that wants to be sub. I mean, why is it that we have these, that men feel like they're confined to these sort of very simple and straightforward, you know, it's difficult for men to express their fantasies, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't actually think it's any different to women. I think we are all placed in a very small, narrow, well-defined box or script, and have the idea that if we don't fit within that confine, then we're weird or abnormal. Whereas actually, of course, that's not the truth at all. Like, fantasy is, you know, I mean, hands up who fantasizes about what they actually do with the person they actually do it with. Fantasy is a gift. It is there to explore ourselves, to push the boundary. It's an opportunity to go into your mind, to a space where maybe you wouldn't want to go to in real life. So it's stretching the sense of who you are. This is an important part of our sexual selves. We shouldn't be frightened by where that takes us, because it's fantasy. But I think people have this idea that if they're not fantasizing in a way that fits their identification as heterosexual, homosexual, male, female, I mean, I think they think that they're weird and they're worried about it. The only problem is we're not talking about it enough. So for the women in the audience, My Secret Garden is a book of women fantasies. And I can assure you they're as diverse as you can, well, not even imagine, probably. And I'm sure the equivalent book out there exists for men. Oh, I haven't read it. But we are supposed to be, you know, the potential of ourselves is so broad and so fluid and so beautiful, and I think it's such a shame that we choose often this rigid role for ourselves in society. I think we often have this narrative that we're in shackles or we're confined or all the rest of it. I think if you look really closely, the person who's choosing those shackles might be you. It's frightening to step outside of these boundaries, but it's your choice to do so.
But it is quite hard to reconcile your sexual self with your public self sometimes, isn't it? For some people that have been brought up a certain way, you have to be this sort of personality to then say, no, I'm this I'm this sexual entity, actually. It is quite hard, I think,
I think it
for
is,
men and women, you know, for everyone.
I think it's hard for anybody to step outside of what society wants to see you as.
Yeah.
Is that different for men than women? I guess what I can say to that from my work world is it always interests me. I think it reflects on our narratives around men. If a woman is a victim of sexual abuse, we look at her and we blame her and we look at her behaviour. We say, why did you flirt? Why did you wear that? Why did you get drunk? All about her behaviour and how she's somehow responsible for what happened to her. With men, what do? We say, oh, you're a victim of sexual abuse. You're a man and you got raped. You're not a real man. We actually go to the core of their male identity and we deny them that. Instead of looking at their behaviours and the rest of it. So I think maybe society has a very rigid idea of what it means to be a man. And so, yeah, maybe it is therefore it feels even more vulnerable to step outside of it. Because if you do, everyone's going to make comments along the lines of you're not a real man.
On that point, Callum, obviously on YouTube, people are expressing themselves more like, you know, someone like yourself, and there's like loads of YouTubers, isn't there? And that seems to me like an amazing thing in terms of expression. Are we now seeing that homosexuality and heterosexuality are sort of becoming outdated because people are now associating being pansexual or being asexual? I mean, are we approaching that point where it's kind of like actually sexuality is so broad? I mean, do you think on the mainstream sense in society as a whole we will start to see that kind of conversation emerge?
Yeah, I think things are starting to kind of blur together a bit. I mean, there was a time when if somebody came out, if a celebrity came out, this was like a big, shocking, terrifying thing, whereas now a person can come out and it be no big deal. I had a friend recently who was quite a large YouTube star, and they came out on YouTube and they were really terrified of doing this. And when they actually made their coming out video, it kind of got like the normal amount of views. Nobody really cared. People were like, oh, right, okay, are you going to do us another video like about something else then? Like they weren't really that excited or bothered anymore, which I think is good. I don't think we should. I mean, it's great to come out. It's great to be proud of yourself. It's great to celebrate that with your friends and maybe your family. I'm gay, I'm here, I'm queer, all that. But we shouldn't be like, every time a celebrity comes out or whatever, it shouldn't be making like headline newspapers and things like that. And I've completely forgot what the question was.
Are we approaching a place where sexuality is becoming sort of, I suppose, kaleidoscopic in the sense that there's many different types of sexuality, not just, you know, people say, I'm heterosexual on this. Now you're getting people saying, no, I'm demisexual, or I'm asexual, I'm pansexual.
Yeah, I mean, the spectrum of sexuality and the spectrum of gender are so broad that I think people are sort of like experimenting more and they don't know where they quite fit into things, and they're not quite as quick to jump into boxes and trying to put other people in boxes. It's just, you are who you are, your sexuality is your sexuality, and yeah.
Going back to one of the things I wanted to ask Callum actually is, I don't know if people have been watching the new London Spy BBC drama, which the first episode, I'm not ruining it for people, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's not a spoiler alert. Have you seen it?
I haven't. I've been reading the hashtag on Twitter, if that counts.
Well, the first episode, it's a thriller, but the first episode was very much about a love story between two men, and there was a very brief sex scene in it. And I write about sex regularly, and I write about porn, so I get paid to watch porn, essentially. So for me, it wasn't shocking at all. But there was complaints, and obviously the Daily Mail picked it up. And it just wound me up that we had this beautiful 50-minute love story, which I don't think is that common on especially on like BBC One mainstream TV. I was like, oh, this is cool that we're seeing a different love story being told. And then, in fact, it seemed to me that some publications took that one brief sex scene as the thing to talk about. This sexualization of homosexuality in 2015 just seems so out of date. I mean, it just drives me mad. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, you look at any sort of mainstream movie about a romance between a man and a woman, and no doubt at some point in that, usually tasteful, there will be a sex scene of some description, but suddenly you put two men or two women or a transgender couple or whatever it might be onto the screen, and suddenly there's outrage. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're subjecting my kids to this. But like, why not subject to the love story between, to the love story between two men? Like, why can't your kids see that, but they can see a man and a woman going at it? And like, even if we look at this in sort of like the term, like if you look at like the board of censorship and things, like they will actually, they're more likely to censor something if it's got 2 men and 2 women than if it's a heterosexual couple. And I know recently the film Carol, which has just come out in the cinema, that has a beautiful, beautiful sort of sex scene between 2 women in that. And I know they really struggled with the board of censors because of that. And had it been a man and a woman, would that have been the same? I don't know, but yeah, and then the Daily Mail get involved in everything.
I do think we do, these important issues, we do jump to the sex way too quick. Like homosexuality, most people jump to the sex, but being gay, like there's much more to being gay than just like what you do in bed. In my world, like people tend to focus on the actual physicality of the abuse. Well, if you've had that experience, it isn't really about that. It's about how it affected you and your life going forward. And for me, it's about understanding the build-up to that in terms of the perpetrator. We tend to jump onto this sex bit. I don't know, we're fascinated with it, it's titillation, it's rubbernecking, or it's the only bit about it that we think we can try and understand.
But does that seem, I mean, it always seems to be in the UK as well, because we're either really prudish, or we go down the carry on, oh, lovely pair of coconuts. It's almost like, is that a particular UK thing, that we seem to be obsessed with sex, but actually the seriousness of sex, like, oh, we can't talk about that? I mean, why do we do that in this country? It seems bizarre.
We do that. I mean,
I'm asking you like the question, aren't I? It's like, oh my God, pressure.
Why? Let me just explain the UK psyche to you.
Yeah, talk be the spokeswoman for a country.
They do, like Scandinavian countries don't get everything right, of course, but I have to say on this issue, they tend to have a much more mature, sophisticated conversations around sex with children from a very young age. I don't know how many, I've had the pleasure of touring the sex offender prisons in Holland. They have a really sophisticated approach to rehabilitation. They just seem to be able to, I guess the answer to me is that they definitely seem to have a more mature relationship with sex, whereas sometimes I think we're a little bit immature, because we're like, ooh, you said bottom. Yeah. And whereas really that wasn't what the conversation was supposed to be about.
No, yeah, I often find that. Yeah. If you see any conversation I have, people just go, oh, bottom.
But I would say here in the UK you can say bottom and everyone laughs. In America that would be bleeped out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Say ass.
It depends if it's after 9 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
You know.
But is the main thing in the US, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think there's more shame around talking about sexuality in America. You know, thinking like Nipplegate. You know, with Janet Jackson a few years ago, and her wardrobe, her dress accidentally came down, and suddenly, like you were saying, the conversation's hijacked, and it's not about this amazing show that she put on, but that her dress slipped down and her nipple showed, and how shameful that was.
It's interesting though, because at the same time, I know what you mean. Like, you're completely right, obviously, but I also find in terms of when we talk about pornography, there's so much more written about that in the States, isn't there? I mean, I know that's where the industry has its main base. But it does seem there's so much more academic texts written that isn't sexualised, just writing about these subjects of sex. So there is it is prudish there, isn't it? But it does seem a little bit more progressive, the States in that sense.
Maybe in academia, but not in the media.
Okay. Now this is the question I really want to, Rebecca, this is the main question for me. Is the erection I know I'm going a bit too heavy on this. I'm not that interested about this, actually. Is the erection the ultimate sign of maleness?
I'm so glad I get to answer that question, because I saw that written in the description, and I partly was like, oh no. No, it is not the unequivocal sign of maleness. I would say that whether you have a penis or not, you can still identify as male. What makes someone a man is that they say they are male. And, we tend to have this kind of binary idea of what a man is. Men have these qualities and women have these qualities, but that's not true, because men can be things that are over in this column and women can be things that are over in this column, and it doesn't make you more or less that thing. And your genitals don't equal your gender. So, whatever genitals you have, you can still choose what your gender is. Your genitals are just a part of flesh that you were born with. And as one of my friends likes to say, same jelly, different molds, right? So everyone's genitals in the room is made out of the same stuff, the same erectile tissue, the same nerve endings, all of that is just formed differently. But who you identify as out in the world is up to you. So it's not about your body parts. It's not about whether you're vulnerable or strong, or you cry at films, or you like to take things up the bum or not. It's about your own identity and what you say you are. So going back to the erection, women have erections. The clitoris is the same as the tip of the penis, and it has all the erectile tissue that a penis has. And so clitorises get erect too. So erections have nothing to do with being a male, no.
Geordie, no, thanks. I'm quite relieved. But yeah.
I feel better now.
Geordie, by the same token, do you find
Yes.
that there is this sense of like, if you can't get it up as a bloke, whether it's on a one-night stand or whether it's in a long-term relationship, whatever it might be,
Absolutely.
there's this sort of stigma of, oh, God, you're less of a man. For being
Completely. And that's, this question first. Definitely. It's something that's out there in society where we feel we're less of a man. And I can happily say it's happened to me before. And the first time it did happen was like, oh my God. And your first thing is, it never happens to me, I swear to God. This is the first time, I swear to God. And of course, she's like, right, of course it does. The first feeling is, I am less of a man. And if I don't have an erection when we're just about to have sex, then what bloody use am I? Jesus. So but also we do refer to it does seem that we do refer to genitals a lot as being a man more than anything else. If I'm with my mates and come out tonight. No, come on, man. Stop scratching your vagina and come out. It's the first thing is we refer to genitals, or grow some balls, or something like that, and that's the first thing. So. I think
grow a pair seems to be, quite a big, that's quite a popular phrase, grow a pair.
Yeah, jump over the fence, no, oh come on, don't you have any balls? There's that sort of thing, even when you're a child, it's always talking about balls and you don't have any and grow a pair and,
Very ball-centric upbringing.
Maybe
Quite a
that was just
ball-centric
my
upbringing there,
childhood,
Geordie. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, in Australia we're very ball-centric.
But why do you think that is, though?
That's why we're so good at sport, I guess, as well.
Do you think it is? But is it to do with sport and that idea of masculinity in Australia? Why is it that we do always seem to go to that, grow a pair of balls? It's bizarre, isn't it? It's the same with my mates. They sort of have that.
I don't know, it's that alpha male sort of thing. It always has been. Always growing up, it's always been, with my mates and playing football or playing cricket or whatever the case is, was always, come on. And the coach would yell out to you as well, come on, don't be a pack of girls, show some balls this half. And it's coming, but when it's coming from above as well, which it always did, you kind of feel, okay, well, if he's saying it, and that's what we're identifying being a male as, and if being, growing some balls or being a male is trying harder, then, I guess he's right. Maybe that's what I associate being a male with.
And going back to the erection point, because I can't stop thinking about erections.
Excellent.
I find as well, like if you have that experience where you can't get it up, there's this idea that you should be emasculated, but actually when it's with women or whoever it might be, they just don't seem to care. So there seems to be this bizarre idea that you should feel bad about it, but actually in my experience people are just like, it doesn't bother me.
I think it's subjective and who you're with in a situation, of course. If you're with someone who really cares about you, and if you're with a long-term partner, it happens, of course, you're probably going to be a lot more at ease because you've got that emotional connection. But if it's with a one-night stand and the whole purpose is basically just to have sex for that moment, then of course you're going to feel a bit more, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I feel really bad because this is all we were going to do.
I suppose the sex is meant to be the main event, as it were.
Exactly, completely.
Yeah, but
Can I say
think
something to
I'm
that?
like, whoa. I think sometimes these sexual failures can be a blessing in disguise, guys. I think we have such a
Who have you
narrow...
been talking to?
Hang on.
I mean, such a narrow definition of what sex is and what sex
True.
isn't. If you, many people who've experienced sexual abuse, quite understandably, they can struggle with sexual intimacy going forward in their lives. And so for them, they can self-identify as a sexual failure. Look, we're not going to be able to do everything because, you know what, I just can't, I'm not comfortable, whatever. They can frame their experience in that way. But the people who are out there and they're flourishing, they recognize that this is an opportunity to explore the sexual part of themselves that they may never have gone down to if they were fully capable of having conventional sex. So I think the opportunity to explore other sexual expression other than the obvious is absolutely part of the key to having a thriving sex life, because it isn't just about that obvious thing at all.
Yeah, the PIV, is it? Penis in vagina sex.
Yeah.
That's really like what were you saying, Callum, isn't it? That's the representation. Yeah, that's the...
I'd like to, I
Sound
agree with
effects.
everything you said, and I would like
Rebecca,
to say
yeah.
also that, if you think that a penis inserting somewhere is sex, is the only way to have sex, then you're really limited, because our whole body is, a sexual organ, as it were, and there's lots of ways to be aroused and share, pleasure and orgasms and all of that. I mean, penis and vagina is great, penis and wherever you want to put them, other places, great, and erections are great, and I know that a lot of men feel more confident when they're able to get an erection when they want one. I get that. That's one of the main things I see in my clinic is working with that, but learning that there's other things that you can do, whether you have an erection or not, gives you a lot more possibility to explore more of who you are and to explore intimacy and deepens your possibilities. I could go on. But
I'd just like to say that I am a man who doesn't enjoy penetrative sex, and this was something that took me a long time to realize. As a gay man, I assumed that I had to have anal sex because that's what I was kind of told, that's what I was kind of subjected to. And then over the years, I kind of realized I'm not really enjoying this. I'm not enjoying being the giver or the receiver in this scenario. But I felt that I had to be. And the shame as a person that brought on me, that I wasn't enjoying this penetrative sex, I felt like I had to do it anyway. I felt like I had a point to prove to one-night stands, to boyfriends, to friends. This was something I kept completely to myself. I told nobody about, and it's only in the past 2, maybe 3 years that I've started opening up this conversation, talking about it to people. And as soon as I do, I found every time I'm with a friend, and a gay friend perhaps, and I bring up this conversation, if I'm with like 4 people, like usually 1 in 4 of them will be like, oh my God, me too. And it's like, well, how many people out there are like that are afraid because we're so kind of obsessed with penetration? It's bringing it back to the erect penis being what sex is, and it's just not the case.
Why did you start talking about it then, Callum? What was it that made you feel more confident?
I actually read an article, it was in Attitude magazine, I think, about being aside is the term for it. And I read that article, I was like, oh my God, this is me. And then I kind of very tentatively started having conversations about this and maybe talking to a couple of friends, like, I kind of feel this way, what do you think about it? And then everyone was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then I just talked about it more and more and more. And it's like, one of the most popular videos on my channel is called Not All Gay Guys Like Anal Sex. And there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments of gay men in there saying, oh my God, I do not like anal sex either. I thought I was the only one.
There was a documentary on, I said in a very loose sense of the word, about 3 years ago, called Sex Box. And it was based on Channel 4, and people had sex in a box. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. And then the minute they came out, they were interviewed, right? And which was bizarre anyway. I mean, the box was, I should say, it wasn't see-through, which personally I think would have made much better TV. But they had like, most people were heterosexual, and then they had a gay couple, and all the other couples they've been talking about, what did you do? With the gay guys, the minute they started, did you have anal sex? They went straight in with that. And I'm like, Jesus, it was bizarre. I mean, is that actually genuinely what people just think? It's just has to be anal.
Yeah, if I like hook up with a guy or something, and I'll be telling my friends about it, and they'll be like, oh, what did you do? And I'll be like, oh, we did oral or whatever. And they'll be like, oh, so you didn't have sex then? And I'm like, no, I mean, we were in my bedroom under the covers for like 7.5 hours.
7 hours? Jesus.
A few times.
God, how old are you? I'm 33. I'd be lucky if I get 20 minutes. Especially with this jacket on. Way too hot. I'm going to actually have to stop now because we're actually running out of time. So thanks very much for coming. Would you like to thank all the panellists? They've been great.